The Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. crackled with tension on a sweltering morning. Justice Clarence Thomas entered the courtroom, his gaze cold and commanding. Without warning, he publicly humiliated Attorney General Pam Bondi with a stinging remark, "The worst Attorney General in history." But mere minutes later, the gavel of justice came down not on her, but on him. Gasps rippled through the packed chamber as Thomas was handcuffed and escorted out, leaving the entire courtroom in stunned silence. The majestic building was bursting with reporters, their laptops and notepads poised to capture every moment. Today's hearing had already drawn national attention not only for its focus on President Donald Trump's controversial immigration policy but for the volatile confrontation between Bondi and Justice Thomas. Before we dive into the full story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the latest updates. The courtroom was filled to capacity, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. Journalists from major outlets crowded the gallery, eager to report on the case challenging Trump's mass deportation order. Pam Bondi, in a perfectly tailored navy suit, approached the podium. Her blonde hair was neatly tied back, her face unreadable. But before she could begin, Thomas's voice sliced through the silence. "Miss Bondi," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm, "I'm surprised to see you here. Does the worst Attorney General in history really believe she can handle a case of this magnitude?" The courtroom froze. Despite the public insult, Bondi remained composed. "Your Honor," she replied calmly, "I represent the government and am fully prepared." A spark of defiance flickered in her eyes. Justice Thomas, at 77, settled into his seat with the air of untouchable authority. His steel-rimmed glasses glinted under the lights, his lips pressed tight. The court officer called for order. As Thomas thumbed through his notes, he barely glanced at Bondi. "I hope you're better prepared than last time," he sneered. "We don't want another embarrassing performance." Tension rippled through the room. Bondi had faced criticism before, but this level of hostility from a Supreme Court justice was unheard of. "I assure you, Your Honor, I am ready," she replied, her southern accent steady and controlled. For the next 40 minutes, Thomas repeatedly interrupted her, dismissing her points with barely veiled contempt. He gave the plaintiffs wide latitude to argue while cutting off Bondi at every turn. Seasoned reporters exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't just tough questioning, it was personal. Still, Bondi held her ground. Calmly jotting notes on her legal pad, she prepared for each strike with poise. As the session neared lunch, Thomas glared over his glasses. "We'll break. Miss Bondi, I suggest you reconsider your strategy. At this rate, the government may want to negotiate." Plaintiff attorneys chuckled. Bondi gathered her papers, slow and deliberate. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said. "I look forward to continuing." As Thomas rose to leave, he failed to notice a thick stack of documents bearing the U.S. Department of Justice seal placed on the table by Bondi's assistant, Sarah. Nor did he see the tall, stern woman now seated quietly in the back row, a Justice Department badge around her neck. A storm was brewing. But Thomas, in his arrogance, failed to sense the dark clouds gathering. After the break, the air was denser, electrified. Thomas returned to the bench with his usual authority, now laced with theatrical disdain. The courtroom had grown more crowded. News of the morning clash had spread like wildfire. "Miss Bondi," he began without ceremony, "I reviewed your brief during the break. I must say, I struggled to follow your reasoning. Perhaps you can enlighten us with your unique interpretation of precedent." Plaintiff attorneys smirked. Bondi straightened her blazer and replied, "I'd be happy to, Your Honor. The precedent in Anderson versus United States, clearly Anderson versus United States, Miss Bondi?" Thomas scoffed. "That case was partially overturned last year. I'd expect even the worst Attorney General to keep up." But Thomas had confused it with a different case, Anderson versus Smith, a glaring mistake to any competent lawyer. Before Bondi could correct him, he went on, "Perhaps in Florida, legal standards are more flexible. But in this court, we expect more than charm and loyalty to President Trump." Gasps. Reporters typed furiously. Even the plaintiff attorneys looked uneasy now. Bondi kept her composure. "If I may," she said, "our supplemental brief, page 17, outlines the distinction between those cases. Thomas waved her off. Miss Bondi, I've been on this bench for 34 years. I don't need a lecture on the law from someone whose career is built on press conferences. The jab hit below the belt. Laura Martinez, the DOJ official in the back row, noted each violation, her pen moving swiftly. Bondi, meanwhile, calmly documented every insult and breach of decorum, her yellow legal pad now a record of judicial misconduct. Your Honor, she said firmly, I request my objection to your characterization be entered into the record. Note what you want, Thomas snapped. It doesn't change the weakness of your arguments. He glanced around, clearly playing to the crowd and the cameras. In my experience, lawyers who complain about the court's tone have run out of arguments. Laughter from the plaintiff's side. But a shift was happening. Sympathy began tilting toward Bondi. The tension, once directed at her, was now turning on Thomas. During a sidebar, Thomas leaned close. You're out of your depth, Miss Bondi. You always have been. Your loyalty to Trump won't save you here. As they returned to their seats, Bondi's assistant slid her another document. A quick glance, a nod, and she tucked it into her briefcase. By now, the courtroom was on edge. A sketch artist captured the contrast, Thomas seething with contempt, Bondi calm, calculated, prepared. 3 hours into the session, Thomas's hostility had become almost predictable. But then Bondi rose to deliver the defense's opening. Before I begin, she said, voice clear, I'd like to address certain procedural concerns. Thomas groaned. Miss Bondi, we've wasted enough time. I do have something substantive, Your Honor, she interrupted, a bold shift from her earlier deference. I refer the court to Judicial Code of Conduct 2A, which mandates that justices must uphold the law while promoting public confidence in judicial integrity and impartiality. Thomas narrowed his eyes. Are you implying this court has failed to meet its standards, Miss Bondi? She didn't flinch. I'm not implying anything, Your Honor. I'll let the facts speak for themselves. Pam Bondi's voice was firm, unwavering. I am formally entering into the record documented evidence of judicial misconduct. The courtroom fell into an uneasy hush. Plaintiff attorneys exchanged surprised glances. With the court's permission, Bondi continued, I'd like to call Special Agent Michael Rivera from the FBI's Public Corruption Unit to testify. A murmur swept through the spectators as a tall man in a dark suit approached the witness stand. After being sworn in, Bondi addressed him. Agent Rivera, can you brief the court on the investigation linked to these proceedings? Rivera nodded. For the past 11 months, the FBI has been investigating systemic judicial corruption involving the Supreme Court. Specifically, we've documented 7 private meetings between Justice Clarence Thomas and Henry Blake, a billionaire with vested interests in the outcome of this immigration case. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Bondi walked to the evidence cart and retrieved a thick file. Your Honor, I submit into evidence transcripts of conversations between yourself and Mr. Blake, which include discussions about ensuring a favorable outcome in this case. She handed copies to the court clerk, the plaintiffs, and placed one directly in front of Justice Thomas. His hands hesitated. His face turned pale. And that's not all, Bondi continued. We have documented wire transfers of significant funds to offshore accounts linked to you, each appearing within 48 hours of rulings that benefited Mr. Blake's entities. The silence was suffocating. Lead plaintiff attorney David Moretti stood abruptly. Your Honor, we request an immediate sidebar. But Justice Thomas didn't respond. His eyes were locked on the documents spreading across the courtroom, bank statements, emails, shell company records, a paper trail leading directly to him. At the back, Deputy Director Laura Martinez of the Justice Department's Public Integrity Section now stood flanked by federal agents, their presence unmistakable. And furthermore, Bondi said, voice unwavering, we have evidence that Your Honor suppressed exculpatory evidence in at least 3 prior rulings that also benefited Mr. Blake. Her assistant Sarah connected a laptop to the courtroom display. A series of emails appeared on screen, explicit, incriminating, and obtained by lawful warrant. These communications, Bondi explained, were secured during the ongoing federal investigation into judicial corruption. Reporters tapped furiously. The special advisory panel looked on, no longer skeptical, but visibly shaken. One elderly panel member shook her head slowly, her expression a blend of disbelief and disappointment. Justice Thomas finally broke his silence, voice unsteady. This is outrageous. These allegations, Bondi cut in calmly, are documented, verified, and corroborated by multiple sources. She nodded to Agent Rivera, who stepped forward with a sealed envelope. This is a formal request from the Department of Justice to suspend this hearing pending a full investigation. The courtroom froze. Thomas's hands trembled as he took the envelope, clumsily opening it. He stammered, reaching for his gavel. This is procedurally irregular. These claims should have been filed through proper legal channels, not broadcast in open court. Bondi didn't flinch. We tried. 3 times over 4 months. Each filing disappeared. After the third, we had no choice but to present the evidence publicly to ensure it reached the record. She gestured to the court reporter who continued typing every word. Copies of the prior filings and delivery confirmations are included in Evidence Packet B. Plaintiff attorney Moretti stood again. In light of these revelations, we respectfully request a recess to consult with DOJ officials present. Thomas's gaze flicked to the back. 5 federal agents now stood in full view, unmoving but watchful. Their presence was loud without a word spoken. Social media erupted. Headlines were already flashing. Bondi exposes Supreme Court corruption. One viral post allegedly from Donald Trump read, "Pam Bondi is cleaning up the corrupt justice system. America first." Still composed, Bondi approached the bench with a thick file. This is a detailed chronicle of today's proceedings, cross-referenced with the judicial ethics code we believe has been violated. The courtroom was silent. Even the press sat straighter. And I'd like to highlight several inconsistencies in Your Honor's rulings, specifically cases nearly identical to this one, in which you accepted the same legal arguments when presented by other attorneys. With each example, Bondi cited precise case numbers, ruling dates, and outcomes, methodically building a case not just of bias, but of targeted hostility. Justice Thomas, visibly rattled, attempted to interrupt. "Miss Bondi, this court will not entertain baseless accusations. These are not baseless," Bondi replied, sliding another document toward the clerk. "This is a formal motion for your recusal under 28 U.S.C. Section 455. It states that a justice must disqualify himself in any proceeding where impartiality might reasonably be questioned." Laura Martinez now stood closer, arms crossed. Panel members leaned in. "We also have reason to believe Your Honor communicated with outside parties who have a direct interest in the outcome of this case," Bondi continued. Sarah distributed sealed envelopes to the court clerk, plaintiffs, and judicial assistant. For the first time all day, Thomas looked genuinely shaken. He reached for his water, his hand trembled. "This is highly irregular, Miss Bondi," he muttered. "Indeed, Your Honor," she replied. "Almost as irregular as a Supreme Court justice meeting privately with plaintiff witnesses before their scheduled testimony." The courtroom gasped. David Moretti stood again, stunned. "Your Honor, we were unaware of any such meetings." Even the court reporter paused briefly before hammering keys with renewed intensity. Justice Thomas's eyes darted to the exit, then back to Bondi. The balance of power had shifted. Everyone in that room could feel it. "The court will recess for 15 minutes, Thomas said abruptly, his voice tight. "Miss Bondi, I expect full documentation of these allegations upon our return." As he left, his confident facade had completely unraveled. During the break, the courtroom only grew more crowded. Headlines screamed across the internet, "Bombshell, Bondi confronts Justice Thomas. Corruption unveiled at Supreme Court." When he returned, the change was unmistakable. Clarence Thomas's voice trembled beneath a veil of forced authority. "Ms. Bondi, you may present your evidence regarding these allegations," the judge said. Pam Bondi approached the bench, her assistant Sarah wheeling in a cart stacked with 3 large evidence boxes. "Thank you, Your Honor," Bondi replied. "With the court's permission, I'd like to call Special Agent Michael Rivera of the FBI's Public Corruption Unit as a witness." A murmur rippled through the courtroom as a tall man in a dark suit stood from the back row and made his way to the witness stand. After being sworn in, Rivera addressed the court. "Agent Rivera," Bondi began, "can you brief the court on Investigation 23 JC 789 as it pertains to these proceedings?" Rivera's expression was grave. "For the past 11 months, the FBI has been investigating a pattern of judicial corruption within the Supreme Court. We have lawfully obtained communications between Justice Clarence Thomas and several individuals with financial stakes in active cases. By now, 5 federal agents were stationed around the courtroom. They didn't speak, but their presence was a silent signal. The focus had shifted from the case to the justice himself. Justice Thomas tried to regain control. "I will review these claims carefully," he said, his tone stiff. "But let me remind the court, allegations are not evidence. I categorically deny any misconduct." Bondi's eyes narrowed. "With all due respect, Your Honor, we're not just making allegations." She turned back to Rivera. "Please brief the court on the status of the evidence." Rivera nodded. "All materials submitted today have been authenticated by the FBI's Forensic Division. The financial transactions have been verified through banking records in 3 countries. Audio recordings have undergone voice analysis. Justice Thomas's voice was confirmed in conversations discussing case outcomes." Thomas, sensing danger, moved to delay. "The court will recess for 30 minutes. All evidence will remain with the clerk, Your Honor," Bondi interjected. "Given the nature of this evidence, we request that U.S. Marshals take custody of it during the recess to preserve its integrity." The room froze. The implication was unmistakable. She didn't trust Thomas with the evidence. He hesitated, then gave a stiff nod. "Very well." As he disappeared into his chambers, the courtroom broke into murmured conversations. Bondi's legal team clustered in quiet but intense discussion. Across the room, lead plaintiff attorney David Moretti conferred urgently with Laura Martinez and a Justice Department official. The advisory panel, usually silent observers, were now whispering amongst themselves. An older woman on the panel met Bondi's eyes and offered a small nod of approval. Inside his chambers, Justice Thomas paced restlessly. He glanced at his phone, visibly torn. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Your Honor," his assistant said softly, "2 FBI agents are here to speak with you." His shoulders sagged. "Let them in." Outside, reporters crowded around their phones, broadcasting the courtroom bombshell across the country. A post from an account claiming to be President Trump went viral. "Pam Bondi is cleaning up the Supreme Court. No room for corruption in America." America First. Bondi, now standing apart from the chaos, pressed her phone to her ear. Her expression was unreadable except for a faint softness in her eyes, the only sign that years of planning were finally bearing fruit. The 30-minute recess stretched to 45. Still, Thomas did not return. Federal agents subtly repositioned themselves closer to exits and to the justices' chambers. A subtle but unmistakable shift was taking place. When the court clerk returned from a hushed hallway exchange, she looked visibly shaken. At exactly 52 minutes into the recess, the court officer emerged, not to call the court back to order, but to speak directly with Justice Department officials. Deputy Director Laura Martinez listened, then stepped into the hallway, phone already in hand. Bondi watched with the calm intensity of a chess master waiting for the final move. Sarah leaned in to whisper something, but Bondi gently signaled for patience. 5 minutes later, the back courtroom doors opened. A woman in a tailored charcoal gray suit strode in, flanked by 2 U.S. Marshals. Her badge identified her, Laura Martinez, DOJ. She walked directly to the front of the courtroom and addressed the room in a firm, steady voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice slicing through the stunned murmurs, "Justice Clarence Thomas is now in custody, pending formal charges of judicial corruption, obstruction of justice, and violations of judicial ethics." Gasps echoed across the room. Some reporters bolted for the exits, eager to break the story first. Others stayed frozen in disbelief. And at the center of it all stood Pam Bondi, calm, resolute, and unshaken, watching justice begin to turn on the very man who once wielded it unchecked. By order of the Chief Judge of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, "This hearing is hereby suspended," the officer announced. "The case will be reassigned to another justice, and all of Justice Thomas's rulings from the past 5 years will undergo a full and independent review." She turned to the special advisory panel. "You are dismissed with the court's thanks. You may be recalled once the case resumes under new oversight." As the panel members quietly exited, many cast subtle glances at Pam Bondi, some with reluctance, others with newfound respect. Laura Martinez approached the defense table. "Ms. Bondi, I understand your team has additional evidence relevant to this investigation." Bondi nodded calmly. "Yes, Director. We've compiled documentation related to 17 cases, each showing a consistent pattern of judicial misconduct. My office is fully prepared to cooperate." David Moretti, lead attorney for the plaintiffs, joined them. His tone was somber. "Director Martinez, I'd like to state for the record that the plaintiffs were unaware of Justice Thomas's conduct. We will initiate a full internal review to ensure the integrity of our filings." Martinez gave a curt nod. "Understood, Mr. Moretti. I suggest both legal teams begin preparations for when hearings resume under new leadership." Across the courtroom, the mood was unrecognizable from earlier in the day. Justice Clarence Thomas, once a commanding figure of the U.S. Supreme Court, now sat slumped in his seat, appearing diminished and shaken. His wrists were now bound in stainless steel cuffs, glinting under the overhead lights. As marshals prepared to escort him out, Thomas's eyes briefly locked with Bondi's. In that fleeting moment, a silent realization passed between them. His downfall had not been due to chance, but the deliberate, strategic effort of the woman he had underestimated. Bondi held his gaze, betraying no emotion. Only those closest to her noticed the slight relaxing of her shoulders, not triumph, but the quiet affirmation of a system holding firm. Moments later, a court officer approached her with a formal suspension order requiring her signature. As she signed, cameras flashed, capturing the image that would soon appear on front pages and news feeds around the world. The Supreme Court, a symbol of power, tradition, and justice, had just witnessed one of the most dramatic reversals in its history. As Bondi gathered her files, preparing to face the storm of reporters outside, she carried more than the weight of victory. She carried the burden and pride of having helped expose corruption at the very top of the legal system she had sworn to protect. Outside, the scene was chaos. News vans jammed the streets, satellite dishes pointed skyward like steel sunflowers. Reporters jostled for position, cameras lifted in anticipation of the defining shot of the day. They didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes after the hearing was suspended, a side door of the courthouse opened. 2 U.S. Marshals emerged, escorting Justice Clarence Thomas into the harsh glare of the D.C. morning. The cuffs on his wrists shimmered in the sunlight, casting flickers across the white stone steps. His once polished appearance was gone, tie loosened, forehead glistening with sweat, his expression lost. As the press shouted questions, "Justice Thomas, any comment on the corruption charges? Were you working alone? Did you target Pam Bondi personally?" He remained silent, eyes downcast, offering no response to the firestorm he had helped ignite. The man who had begun the day by publicly mocking Pam Bondi now couldn't summon the courage to face the nation. As marshals placed him into a waiting black SUV, social media erupted. One post from former President Trump went viral within minutes. "Pam Bondi just saved American justice. Corrupt Justice Clarence Thomas exposed." America First. Bondi exited through the courthouse's main doors to an explosion of flashing cameras and shouted questions. Standing on the steps, the sunlight catching her blonde hair, she paused just long enough to speak clearly and firmly. "Today, we upheld the integrity of the justice system." Her voice cut through the noise like a gavel. Reporters furiously scribbled her words as cameras zoomed in. Her legal team, led by Sarah, stood behind her, serious, steady, proud. Laura Martinez and FBI agents followed shortly after, quietly continuing their investigation. In hand, they now carried Bondi's 17-case dossier, proof that Thomas's misconduct wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a deeply troubling pattern. Inside the courthouse, Moretti and the plaintiff team began a review of their own. Meanwhile, the advisory panel, still whispering in disbelief, slowly made their way out, one elderly member pausing to nod quietly at Bondi in approval. The Supreme Court, long a pillar of American justice, now faced a crisis of credibility. But Bondi's actions had rekindled a measure of public trust. As she descended the steps, news outlets debated whether this marked the beginning of true institutional reform or the political weaponization of justice. But for Bondi, the answer was clear. This wasn't about power. It was about accountability. Her 6-month investigation, built on quiet persistence, undeniable documentation, and strategic alliances, had brought down one of the most powerful men in America. This wasn't just a courtroom win. It was a national reckoning. The lesson: in today's America, where trust in institutions is eroding, this story is more than legal drama, it's a reminder that courage, patience, and preparation can bring even the most powerful to justice. That documentation and support, like Bondi's alliance with FBI agent Rivera and DOJ's Martinez, are key to confronting systemic wrongdoing. And that dignity in the face of disrespect is not weakness, but strength. So whether you're facing injustice in a courtroom, a workplace, or anywhere else, remember what happened here. And act with the same resolve. Subscribe to the channel to follow more powerful stories of truth, justice, and accountability, just like Pam Bondi's battle at the Supreme Court. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.